Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for making it today, in spite of the weather, for our event organized by the European Movement International and in partnership with European Women's Lobby, with the support and sponsorship of Microsoft. Thank you so much for providing this venue and all the logistical and other support to have this discussion today. We are going to talk about mobilizing different stakeholders against gender-based violence, including online abuse. And the event comes ahead of the 16 days of activism against the gender-based violence, and also is part of our more broader efforts to raise awareness about gender equality and different issues women face in the context of Women of Europe. It's an award European Movement International and European Women's Lobby organize for 9 years now. Award that wants to celebrate and acknowledge exquisite women who have contributed to the promotion and enforcement of European values across the world. We want to discuss this issue at the very early stage of the new European legislature and term, because there are so many issues that will be probably be shaped in the following couple of years. And we want to bring different stakeholders from the organized civil society, from the business, and from the institutions, so that we can see how we can craft together better strategies and eradicate violence against women and domestic violence. I have to say at the beginning that the event is recorded, so we are not live streaming, but it's going to be published, so just that you are aware of this. And if you are making any kind of social interaction and discussing issues you hear here, please use the hashtag Women of Europe and tag European Movement International. We are on almost, I think almost all, because they are emerging social media at the moment. And you can mention us so that we can retweet or repost, etc. I have to, before we start, also apologize for Lina Galvez, member of the European Parliament and chair of the FEM committee, who informed us yesterday that she is ill, and she is really deeply sorry that she could not attend this event. She specifically apologizes to the fellow panelists, but we hope we will have an opportunity to engage chair of the FEM committee in the future events. But we have an excellent panel with us. Maria Mollica, who is the team leader in the DG Just, Violence Against Women in the European Commission. Good morning, and thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you.
Katarina Valent-Bureau, who is General Manager of the Strategic Partnerships here in Microsoft. Hello, Katarina, and thank you very much. And last but not the least, Maria Kumen, Governance Director of the International Center for Future Generations.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning, thank you so much. Maria, I want to start with you. We have been aware for several years now, since 2019, that President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, strives together with all of you in the Commission and other stakeholders to achieve union of equality, where gender equality is really one of the very important pillars. How are you satisfied with what has been done and what remains to be done, maybe specifically in the context of today's topic, fighting violence against women?
Thank you very much for this first question, which allows me to start with, I would say, a positive tone, because I would say that we can be satisfied with what the first von der Leyen Commission has delivered. I would say that all of the promises and the commitments in the Gender Equality Strategy 2020-2025 have been kept. I'm thinking in the first place about the Violence Against Women Directive, which was adopted in May this year. Also, the accession of the European Union to the Istanbul Convention in October last year. And then moving a little bit away from violence against women, I want to also mention the new rules on pay transparency to strengthen the application of the principle of equal pay for equal work, the targets to improve gender balance on corporate boards, and the new rights to improve work-life balance. So, overall, we can say that these are very important building blocks to improve the situation of women in the labor market and in decision-making, and also to make society safer for women and girls. Now, we have still 2 deliverables in the pipeline, and we are working to make them a reality before the current strategy expires. First, one of the commitments in the strategy that remains to be delivered is the adoption of a Commission recommendation to prevent and combat harmful practices against women and girls. The Commission has already conducted consultations time ago with regard to this recommendation, and we have already a draft recommendation ready. However, as the scope of the recommendation partially overlaps with the scope of the directive, at some point we decided to put on hold the adoption of the recommendation and concentrate on the directive, so to ensure a full complementarity and coherence between the 2 instruments. Now that the directive has been adopted, we are just waiting for the new college to be in place. And as we heard yesterday, the new college should start its work on the 1st of December. So very soon we will receive, hopefully, political endorsement on this recommendation, and we will proceed with the adoption. Another commitment under the current gender equality strategy is the engagement by the Commission to facilitate the establishment of a new framework for cooperation between internet platforms. This will take the form of a code of conduct, hopefully under the Digital Service Act, like the current existing already Code of Conduct on countering illegal hate speech online. Now, our Code of Conduct will focus on countering gender-based cyber violence. The preparatory work has already started, so in the future months, by the end of 2025, we count on having the Code of Conduct put in place. So I would say that thanks to the very ambitious agenda of the first von der Leyen Commission, we have made big steps forwards in the fight against gender-based violence. At the same time, however, it's absolutely clear that work is not over. Gender-based violence remains a terrifying reality for far too many people in the EU. The anti-gender backlash, the rising of right-wing governments with their conservative views on the role of women of society, the fast spreading of gender-based cyber violence, all this is terribly concerning. Now, the EU has more tools to fight against gender-based violence, but the fight must continue to be fought. I would say that full implementation of the Directive on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence will be key. This is the first comprehensive EU law in the area of gender-based violence. It includes also measures of prevention, measures for victims' access to justice, protection, support, and it is the first criminal law instruments to criminalize the most widespread forms of cyber violence. Non-consensual sharing of intimate or manipulated material, cyber stalking, cyber harassment, and gender-based hate speech will be crimes in the criminal codes of all the member states. One big personal regret is the non-inclusion of the definition of the crime of rape based on lack of consent. Probably you know about the saga around that. Unfortunately, there was a blocking minority in council, but the parliament wisely decided to have the directive adopted, including a strong article on the prevention of rape and on the promotion of the role of consent in sexual relationships, together with a strong review clause, rather than having no directive at all. Now, in the coming 3 years, this is the time period given to the member states to transpose the directive, the Commission will work with member states, organizing implementation workshops so that all the obligations in the directive will be timely and completely transposed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned the violence takes many forms and more and more online. Katarina, Microsoft has been proactive in this respect, and you have published and prepared recently a white paper protecting the public from abusive AI-generated content, which is a very interesting document and also shocking in some statistics and data that you have captured there. Can you tell us more about it, and especially how it deals with the issues related to gender-based violence online?
Yes, thank you, Maya, and thank you all for being here with us at Microsoft today for this conversation that we think is absolutely critical, and it's really good to hear both a bit of what the European Commission has been doing over the last 5 years, but also to know that there's more work planned. And we were glad to see yesterday that you seem ready to be able to start work finally after a protracted period. So yes, so we've worked on this paper on protecting the public against abusive AI-generated content, which is broader than women. It looks like vulnerable groups online more broadly. Initially, this has been a set of recommendations for US lawmakers, but we're now working on a European version as well. Essentially, if you sort of looking at the gender-based dimension first, I think what this paper does is really recognize at the outset that AI has brought with it many potentially transformational opportunities for society, but with that also comes many potential risks and challenges that we need to address. So that's one. Second, it recognizes that when it comes to abusive AI-generated content, women are often disproportionately impacted. And thirdly, it sets out a set of recommendations for how do we tackle this together between policymakers, industry and civil society, but in particular, what are the sort of regulatory advancements that we can potentially make that would help to address this? And so the paper really looks at, it sort of sets out what is the challenge, what is Microsoft's approach, and then how do we start sort of begin to combat some of these problems together? And when it comes to the approach, I think we try and look at this very holistically. So it ranges from what can we do on the technology side? So building in safety by design, trying to ensure that any manipulated content or content online is labeled. How do we ensure, as I said, robust collaboration? So we have a constant feedback loop between industry and policymakers to sort of together come up with measures that really are the most actionable and targeted at where the problems are. Modern legislation and awareness, of course, between all stakeholders and the public of the issues to ensure that people can protect themselves, know where to go if they've been harmed, reporting mechanisms, etc. And I think core to all this in the paper is this recognition that we really do have a responsibility to help address the potential harms that come out of this technology, and that the harms aren't equally spread. So we started out, part of the origin of the paper was the amount of elections this year, and next to looking at there was a lot of fear around how new technologies would impact elections, not least deep fakes. We signed a tech accord earlier in the year at the Munich Security Conference with all the leading industry players to see how we could work together to really identify and tackle some of the risks that would pertain to these elections. I think luckily we didn't see quite as much disruption of the elections including the EU elections, as we'd perhaps feared. But one thing that became very clear was that, as I mentioned, the deep fakes are targeted at political leaders are disproportionately targeted at women leaders. And so we started working together with women political leaders, both in Europe and around the world. And they're, it's just, and I think this is increasingly well known, but not well known enough. I mean, the amount of online abuse and threats and challenges that you face online as a woman political leader is it's quite astonishing. And so we focused on that in particular around the elections. That's also one of the areas that the paper looks at. So how can you help protect women political leaders online as a way of essentially safeguarding democracy and ensuring that they don't leave political life because it's just too unbearable to have everything thrown out in the public. And working together, again, as I said, as a multi-stakeholder community to recognize this problem, to drive awareness around this issue, and to tackle it. So those are some of the things that the paper looks at and that we're now working on to kind of place in the context of the EU regulatory system, which thankfully is actually quite a lot more robust than the American one is. And so where can we make a contribution here and perhaps look at recognizing that are there still loopholes that need to be closed or that we can improve, for example, as we look at adoption of this directive. So perhaps I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you so much. I really recommend everyone who hasn't to read. For me, it was a bit revealing. And you have stated there that your own consumer research, just to add a bit, shows that teen girls are more likely to experience risks online, 72% of teen girls, and 69% of respondents globally are worried about the potential use. And what was even more shocking, that there were in 2023, in September only, 24 million unique visitors to synthetic, non-consensual, intimate image websites, which is like 2,400% increase. And these are really, the problems that indicate and maybe why you decided to of course, address this issue. And we can talk about all of this a little bit before. Maria Kumen, who is coming from the think tank dealing with technology and democracy and the intersection of different issues. Can you tell us what you do specifically around emerging technologies and specifically addressing how do you address gender-based violence in your work?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation, for including me here. It's such an honor to be part of this conversation. It's a very important conversation. So I'm coming from the Center for Future Generations, which is a new think tank, independent think tank based here in Brussels, focusing on the role of emerging technologies in impacting society for current generations as well as future generations. And our mission is to help better understand technologies coming down the pipeline and how they stand to impact us and what we can do about to govern them, to ensure that they are they're rolled out in society in the best interests of the public. So I'm coming to this this topic specifically looking at gender-based violence with a digital lens or a technology lens. And I figured I'd actually start with a bit of a personal anecdote. Last week, I posted in a group chat a statement based on facts by the World Economic Forum on the global gender pay gap. I posted the statement, very crisp. It was last Thursday, saying today at 4:48 p.m. until the end of the year, women work for free. And the first response, almost immediately, was from a male person who said, I'd say it's a bit more nuanced than that. And I share this. It may seem harmless, but actually it's a bit more insidious this example shows that instead of engaging in a conversation around the issue, I was told that this statement based on facts was polemic. And as you can imagine, a quite interesting and quite heated debate followed. And I raise this specifically because gender-based violence, particularly online, is, as we've heard from our fellow speakers, is pernicious, but is often insidious. And it is a growing issue. So what is it? What we know of the more insidious versions, we have gendered slurs, shaming, trolling, cyberbullying. This many forms of gender-based violence effect in digital exclusion and perpetuating offline inequalities. But also deep fakes, as we've heard, cyber harassment, other forms destroy reputations, they silence voices, and they isolate victims. And as every single speaker has mentioned, often gender-based violence disproportionately affects women, other marginalized groups, especially those in leadership or public roles. So why are we talking about this now? The COVID pandemic sharply increased this issue online as people essentially came online from public spaces offline. It's an ever more powerful technologies are emerging, and so this issue is set to be exacerbated or mitigated, and considering the identity politics dominating most of our public spaces across Europe, this political polarization is essentially putting women and all their diversity in the crosshairs. So all hands on deck. Collective action is needed now. And the EU, as we've heard, has made some extremely significant strides in tackling this, from building up legal frameworks like the Istanbul Convention in place, the violence against the directive on violence against women, but challenges remain. Obviously, we have to implement these legal frameworks, and as well, importantly, foster societal change. So four key sort of areas and challenges and ideas for action from our perspective. A big one is we don't really understand gender-based violence online well enough to act proportionately. I think we've heard that there are a number of really important legal steps taken, but underneath the legal framework we have in place, we still have a growing gap of knowledge, of data. So we need comprehensive, interdisciplinary, intersectional data and research. Without that, it hampers our ability to actually respond. Actually, next week, the AGE, sorry, I'm going to say a bunch of acronyms, the FRA, the Fundamental Rights Agency, and Eurostat will come out with a report with much needed and collaborative data on this front. 2, legal frameworks. Progress and gaps. We heard from Maria, there's an enormous amount of progress on the Istanbul Convention, the new EU directive. We have the EU Victim Rights Directive, and as well the Digital Services Act, among other up-and-coming tools. All of these tools, essentially, we need to take a tool and toolbox approach, all hands on deck, as I mentioned. And specifically on the online tools, looking at the Digital Services Act, for example, this is a really, really important tool for online safety. But I must point out that removing content is only part of the battle. Number 3, education as prevention. Gender-based violence is a social construct, and it is often normalized in early childhood, forming the root causes of violence. So addressing these gaps, addressing these issues with targeted education programs can actually prevent future violence. Teachers, school books, curricula, really, I think there's so much we can do to shape gender stereotypes and violence, especially in a gendered context, by helping shape gender understanding and culture and our ability as a society to work with gender constructs. And last, for support for victims and also accountability for perpetrators. For victims, we already heard from Maria, we have a really, really strong legal framework to be implemented over the course of the next few years. I think from a governance standpoint, really the work is left to be done by of course, member states and ecosystem, really by society at large. But I think specifically a rights-based approach to enforcing and implementing these this whole set of rule books is crucial. Beyond victim support, aggressor-focused measures like mandatory trainings for for aggressors must expand to include the private sector's role. I know that there's a lot of room for complementing public initiatives and public actions and efforts with private sector collaboration. So I think from our standpoint, it's really a whole of society approach that needs to be taken, and especially online, there is a great opportunity for private actors online to play a big part. So I guess to wrap it up, call to action, collaboration, absolutely key, crucial. In innovative ideas like building online shelters or mandatory training programs, essentially showing the potential for public-private sector contributions. For younger generations, especially, fostering equality and dismantling stereotypes that underpin gender-based violence will shape the future where violence is neither normalized nor tolerated. And last, let's commit to turning awareness into action. Ensuring all women in all of their diversity are safe online and offline.
Thank you so much, and thank you for mentioning so many issues. I would now follow up with most of them, but I will just pose additional one question per panelist, and then we really want to keep it interactive and to allow all of you to comment and jump in. I want to just follow up, Maria, with you still to ask you. You were discussing about all of the different possible measures that should be taken, but in your work in this intersection democracy and emerging technologies, having in mind that the activism is more and more digital, and having in mind that women, and especially young girls, are being terrified of different abuses, what would be the long-term effect on our democracies if the problem is not efficiently addressed with all the complex measures you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a big question. Long term, I think we can take a really broad view on this, and it's important to take a broad view on this. If we're looking at gender-based violence online, as I mentioned at the beginning, many forms of gender-based violence online have a silencing effect, and more women, especially in public or leadership roles, are leaving. If not leaving entirely, are stepping out, are thinking twice about posting something online or having online presence, and that can have a very chilling effect societally in terms of the presence of women in public discourse.
Yeah.
And it's happening now already. So if we imagine that we essentially the status quo remains, we will continue to see women shrinking away from public roles. I mean, there are a number of ways, obviously, to think about this and to see this, but in this setting, I think talking about gender-based violence and ways to tackle gender-based violence is crucial, but also on the other hand, focusing on supporting and empowering women leaders and ensuring that there are safe spaces and there are support networks and there are that we're actively boosting women in all of their diversity to continue being there, to continue being part of public discourse. I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for that comment. Katarina, you mentioned the white paper that you have produced, but can you tell us a little bit more about the role of Microsoft in contributing to this very necessarily broad fight against gender-based violence, especially online? And maybe if you have some initial comment on the directive that is tackling a lot of the online violence in...
Yeah, maybe just to comment briefly on what you just said, Maria. Yesterday I was with my colleague in another kind of roundtable conversation talking about the same issues, and there were a few expert women who have worked a lot in this area, kind of, I think they call them sort of feminist digital activists, and they were mentioning having set up these online shelters and digital self-defense kits, and these were great initiatives, but it was a little depressing, I have to say, to just think about how all this now kind of has to exist online as well. So it just reinforced, of course, the importance of the work on combating violence online against women. So we take our role very seriously, of course, when it comes to protecting our users from illegal and harmful content, and in general, contributing as much as we can to a safer online environment. I think there are three kind of main ways that we do this. One is, as I mentioned earlier, really by advancing technology as much as possible as you can to ensure that it's safe and as difficult as possible to cause harm with it from the beginning. Thinking deeply about the kinds of partnerships that we need to have and work with to tackle these problems, and then advocating for changes to the law and regulations. So I'll come back to the directive. I think it's important to point out, and you share some of the statistics, this kind of the creation and dissemination of synthetic, non-consensual intimate imagery was around, before in Gen AI, or the current sort of intensification of the debate. I think a report by Sensity AI found that 96% of so-called deepfakes are pornographic, and 99% of those are made of women. So it's, when we say disproportionately a gender issue, it's really very disproportionately a gender-based issue. And of course, these types of images have been used for a long time to shame, harass, extort, all the different things that you mentioned. So we have comprehensive policies in place. I mean, I can just maybe share a few examples, also a little bit picking up on, you have a Center for Future Generations, how important it is that we look at what we can do, also working with youth, and from a sort of preventative perspective. We have policies in place on platforms like game where we enable gaming, so whether it's Xbox or on Minecraft, both of course policies that kind of shut down users if they engage in hate speech online or messaging or things that you're not allowed to do, but also try and educate young users. Type of behavior is not accepted, consequences of that type of behavior, etc. On our developer platform, GitHub, we have a policy that prohibits the sharing of any software tools that could be used to create non-consensual intimate imagery. And we prohibit any sort of sexual content being created through our generative AI services. So those are all the kind of things that you can put in place from the technology side. We've recently announced a partnership with Stop NCII, which is a platform to also help adults ensure that their non-consensual intimate imagery isn't shared. And I think, this is a growing problem. So there's so many of these images out there circulating, but we've already, I think, managed to take down over 300,000 images through that partnership. So small examples of progress and things that you can do to actually to tackle it. On the directive, I think our view is, of course, it's a good and important step, of course, also in terms of creating a harmonized base for addressing the issue. I think there are a couple of things. One is that one of the problems is the technology is kind of advancing faster than legislation can keep up. So there are already things that this directive doesn't tackle. It doesn't cover things like deep nudes. I think there's some of the language in the directive means that only explicit sexual activity is incorporated rather than potentially artificially created images that are nude but aren't engaged in activity. I mean, it gets a bit specific, but there are, potential loopholes there that is really important for member states when they, start the process of implementation and ratification, that they do that in a way that's really comprehensive and I think, implements the spirit of the directive and all the abuse that it's designed to tackle, rather than just the wording that maybe at the time when it was developed, some of the further nuances of how AI has developed and the further harms that can create online isn't necessarily captured. So that's one of the things that we look at in the white paper for the EU version. How can we kind of draw attention to some of those potential loopholes and encourage member states to really embrace it and adopt it in a comprehensive way.
And this white paper is going to be available when?
We will launch it in early spring once the new commission and the new mandate is in place. But we are working with partners and stakeholders now to have a sort of as broad as broad an approach as possible with civil society. Okay,
thanks a lot. Maria Mollica, I'm practicing my Italian, just saying your surname to distinguish between
two
Marias. It has been mentioned the importance of the directive, but also the importance of member states to actually adopt them and enforce them, taking into account the very dynamic nature of the problem. But we still have 5 member states who did not ratify Istanbul Convention. EU and 22 have, but do you think this directive somehow compensates this problem, or are there any other measures that you see that could address the problem that 5 are still outside the international obligations?
Thank you for the question. It's going to be a bit technical, but bear with me. So, now that the EU has acceded to the Istanbul Convention, all member states are bound by the obligations in the Istanbul Conventions in the areas which are covered by exclusive competencies of the Union. This means areas where the Union has largely covered le terrain by adopting EU law. This area of exclusive competence are judicial cooperation in criminal matters, asylum and non-refoulement, and matters that concerns EU institutions. I go back to judicial cooperation in criminal matters. This area is an area of exclusive competence for the Union because, namely with the adoption of the Violence Against Women Directive, we covered le terrain. Now, it's member states don't have external competencies. To make it simple, and coming to your questions, now these 5 member states who have not yet ratified the Istanbul Convention are indirectly bound by the Istanbul Convention because they are required to transpose the Directive on Combating Violence Against Women, which implements actually the Istanbul Convention in the EU legal order. So, good news there. So,
thanks for
large
you.
part of the Istanbul Convention is nonetheless binding to those member states too. This said, of course, it would be ideal that all the member states ratified the Istanbul Convention, at least for 3 reasons. First, it will bound them also for the areas which are not covered by EU law. Second, it would signal a strong commitment with regard to women's rights and an appropriate alignment with European values. And third, it would make those member states also subject to the monitoring activities of GREVIO, which is this body of experts in matters of violence against women and domestic violence, which also provides expert advice tailored to the situation of any contracting party to the convention. I hope it was not too technical.
No, I think it was. Thank you so much for this explanation. It was very good. We can take questions now if there are any immediately. Yes, I see a couple of hands. The lady next to the first, yeah, with the.
Hi.
If you can introduce yourself, just
Yes,
thank
Antonella Crichigno. I work in communication now, but I've started my career in the institutions working on women's rights. I know the fight for gender-based violence and for gender equality is still there. I do have a question for both Marias. I would like to know from your perspective, from the institutional one and from the think tank one, if you have encountered any resistances in trying to switch the narrative from a victim-centered narrative to a perpetrator-centered one, and if you have put something in place in order to avoid the double victimization of women and to, to advocate for accountability of aggressors. Thank you.
Thank you. You want to go, Maria? Or
Which one?
Monica?
Okay. Well, throughout the consultation phase and also during the negotiation phase, the need to keep a victim-centered approach was a commonly agreed point. No, we didn't hear any contrasting voice. Regarding the secondary and repeat victimization, it's an aspect that we try to cover and address in the directive itself. The first thing that comes to my mind is the requirement for member states to ensure that in judicial proceedings that the privacy of the victim is safeguarded and that no unnecessary questioning and concerning the victim past sexual life and private life in general is asked. Also, all the requirements for law enforcement authorities to be trained to deal with victims in a trauma and gender-sensitive manner. Behind that requirement, there is the need, we wanted to address the need for these authorities to avoid making the victim feel victimized again because of the way questions are asked, of the way reporting is received, etc. So this was already a point covered by the General Victim Rights Directive, which is the general framework for for the rights of victims. But it is so relevant when it comes to victims of gender-based violence, because we all know the rate of reporting of violence against women and domestic violence is way lower than the actual amplitude of the problem. And one of the reasons is precisely the fact that victims face this secondary victimization from police, from judges, from all actors they come into contact with. And this is why I go again on the training article. It's a very, very long article. We tried as much as possible to cover as many categories of professionals as possible, all those actually who may potentially come into contact with victims, to avoid precisely that victims are discouraged from reporting the violence they suffer.
Yeah. Maria, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and it's interesting to hear from the EU perspective. I think in terms of looking at it from a victim's perspective or from an aggressor's perspective, I think it's important to look at it both ways. And that's tough to do, but I think it will take time and to complement the legal, the regulatory approach. Actually, the anecdote I shared at the beginning is kind of a perfect example of secondary victimization. It's like saying that the statement is polemic. It's kind of like it's like asking a victim, "Oh, what were you wearing? Oh, but do you know the aggressor already?" Or those kinds of questions. And it points to the insidious nature of secondary victimization. It's a really tough nut to crack. But we need to crack it. I think there is friction, and as you can see across the politics of just the sheer politics behind getting the directive for combating violence against women to bring it to life, showcases just the tip of that iceberg, and so politics plays I think a really large role. And as I mentioned, the social constructs behind gender-based violence are extremely complex, and we really need to take a comprehensive view to look at both the victims and the aggressor standpoint. I think in terms of the victim's standpoint, if I was a victim of gender-based violence online, the worst case would be, it's kind of now, if I was victimized and I felt completely alone and I had nowhere to, or I didn't even know where I could turn, and I would just stop posting. I would leave the platform. I would be silenced. Best case scenario, I'm victimized, and actually I have like tons of places to turn. I have people watching out for me. The technology itself is actually watching out in terms of the algorithms and the mechanisms used, AI essentially used to see and to recognize repeat offenses, or even eventually, maybe even to recognize secondary victimization. And I have support groups, I have legal tools, I have access to justice. That's, best case scenario is I don't feel alone. On the aggressor side, it's interesting you mentioned in the world of gaming how like with Xbox, for example, and I know other online game companies are not only do they for example for child sexual abuse material, different, very bad. When child sexual abuse material is shared on gaming platforms or shared in chats on gaming platforms, perpetrators' accounts removed, perpetrators' hardware disabled, so they can't just create a new account and keep sharing it. They're actually frozen. The company is is taking a step forward, is sort of raising the bar a bit higher and imposing a consequence to the aggressor. I think this is exactly the kind of responsibility that we need to see from the private sector to not just focus on the victims, it's very important, but also focus on playing a role in imposing accountability for aggressors. So bar is high.
Yeah, thanks.
Maybe just
yes, please.
Pick up a bit on the political nature of this as well, and your question about aggressors. And I think we really have to look at and be wary of where European political discourse as well is going. I think the fact that when you look at the hearings we've just had of the European commissioners designate, there were at least 2 of the female commissioner candidates who were asked if they were only there because they were token women. You know, is this an appropriate question to ask of a commissioner candidate? I think the ones that I heard gave robust responses. One of them was the future technology commissioner, Henna Virkkunen. She made it very clear in her answer that gender equality and combating violence online, digital safety is going to, be one of her priorities and a priority of the new von der Leyen Commission, thankfully. And we, look very much forward to continuing working with them on digital safety. But to the question about, what's the onus on the aggressors? I don't know what kind of backlash there was against the people who asked those questions, but I think we need to ask ourselves if that type of tonality has a place in a commissioner hearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if I may also make a comment now, hearing this, it makes me think of now the rate of female member of the European Parliament decreased significantly. So we may ask the question, are all those men there as a majority, large majority, because they are men? I mean, we have coexisted with this, it goes without saying, men have priority in public positions, and the fact that von der Leyen wisely again wanted to have candidates appointed by member states having an equal number of women and men is only, it's needed to correct an inbuilt defect in society where men have always the first chance to cover public position.
A lady has been waiting, a couple of ladies. So we can take 3 questions now. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you. My name is Becky Slack, and I run a strategic communications agency called Agenda. I've been working in this space for about 20 years now, and it feels like we keep having the same conversations over and over again. It just feels really, really hard to make significant change in this area. And I wonder if part of the reason is because we as women perhaps aren't doing enough to bring more men, allies, along with us. I look around the room now and it's really great to see a few men here, but I go to loads of events like
Mostly
this.
Mostly from European movement.
Yeah. I go to lots of events like this and there's hardly ever met any men here. We're almost preaching to the converted. We know this stuff needs to happen and we know what needs to happen, but how do we bring more men into this movement so that they take the constructive action that we need to see?
We take a couple of more questions. I saw some. Yes, and then the lady in both red and black.
My name is Hannah Austin, and I had a question regarding how big of a hurdle anonymity in the internet is going to be to tackle those issues in general, gender-based violence and online abuse, because we can take those images down, we can take videos down, we can take harmful content down, but how far does it really go that we hold the people accountable that post those stuff when there's a big safeguarding of those people? For example, when it comes to Instagram, harmful comments, you can always just have a fake account, make a new account. How effective can we actually hold people accountable for their actions when the internet kind of also safeguards those people so much?
Thank you. Yes, and both. We will take both questions. Yes, please, go on.
Hello. I'm Eliana Zatzler, Secretary General with European Women Lawyers Association. We are the only NGO at EU level doing gender equality with women lawyers. I would have one recommendation for a book for everyone here in the room from Maria Ressa, the Peace Nobel Prize. Her book is called, the one that I'm thinking of now is How to Stand Up to a Dictator. Among other things, she explains there how lies spread 7 times faster than truth online. And she also has some solutions in her book. That's one thing. And then my question for Maria Rosaria would be, so we have the directive on violence against women. We have the Istanbul Convention. We have the Victims' Rights Directive. What next can you share for the new strategy of the EU Commission on top of what's in the letters from President von der Leyen to her commissioners? I hope there's something you can tell us, and maybe how us NGOs can support you, because so far our NGO has really supported the Commission. We have barely no critics for all the legislation that has been put up by President von der Leyen and her team. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Juana Duma. I work also in communication, and I was going to ask the same question on switching the narrative from victims to perpetrators. But I also happen to have founded an initiative in Romania called Women in Politics. And we work with a lot of women who struggle a lot to continue in politics because of how hard it is to face gender-based violence online and offline within the party. I'm not even talking about tackling it outside. So my question regarding the first part, the first one that was addressed, is more around, and that's how I understood it, more around the storytelling of gender-based violence. It's a very black thing. It's a very, something very bad, something that not all men do, and that's where it gets stuck. I don't see us going further in any way, privately, publicly, sector, like everyone. We seem to be, exactly like the previous speaker said, we seem to be going in circles in the same kind of environments when we talk openly about it and we're aware. But when you try to communicate about it, fun fact also from our side, we've tried a lot of awareness campaigns where we've just put numbers on top, and that just triggers automatic response from male users saying, whatever, it's not like that, not all men do that. We're just focusing on a very small percentage of the population. And I think what I've been missing, despite the fact that I know that the Commission is doing the efforts and apparently the private sector is also doing things, is how we switch a bit, or how we engage men and how we make them aware that they're actually a big part of the problem, not the victims, or even partly victims, because they end up. So it all leads me to the education part that you mentioned before. And I would just want to know if there's anything anywhere in the pipeline that we could look forward to, even if it's in 30 years' time, but just anything that could bring a ray of light in the whole context. Because I can say from a country that has a very big electoral weeks right now going on, that gender-based violence or anything that puts women on an equality foot is not something that's happening. It's not something that people are aware of. And I'm talking politicians and not politicians, but I think the politicians have the power to change. And that was the first reason I got involved in this, because it seems like the highest, the quickest way to change the biggest numbers of lives. But right now, it just seems like we're stuck in a very dark period. So I'm just looking for a ray of light.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Okay, so many questions. Who wants to start?
I can start.
Maria.
I noted down indeed very good questions, all of them. how to make more men allies in the fight against gender-based violence. I think one key way to make them allies is to put the focus on the fact that gender inequality and stereotypes in particular affect men and boys to a great extent. I have noted down here, we are thinking about that for not non-legislative initiatives, but we have always spoken about gender stereotypes and how it affects gender equality for women, but not enough about how gender stereotypes affect the situation of boys and men. Because the gender-related expectations affects men's view on their roles in society throughout their lives, and the amount of pressure generated by either fulfilling or failing these roles is huge. It could generate emotional suppression, risk-taking and violent behaviors, mental health challenges. Statistics seems to indicate that there are more cases of boys who commit suicides compared to girls. Impact on relationships, imperfect educational and professional outcomes. We know that the rate of success of boys at university is lower than that of girls. Career restrictions to male-dominated sectors, they repeat the same choices, while maybe they may be also deep down attracted to other types of careers, but because of stereotypes, they stick to the same choices, and therefore that creates a frustration. Work-life balance issues, which limit emotional bonding with children. These are real problems for boys and men. We don't talk very much about that. We only talk about the stereotypes and the harmful effect on women. Maybe switching the attention on this other side of the coin may trigger, as a result, having men and boys more interested into the world of gender equality, because they will realize that there is something to gain for them too. And indeed, they would become so beneficiaries of gender equality and start being only observers, but actors in the pursuit of this equality. How do we hold people accountable, especially in the online dimension of gender-based violence? Well, with the directive, we have taken the bazooka, and all of those conducts will be crimes that lead to prison sentences going up to at least 1 year of prison. And if the conduct is perpetrated against a person because the person is a journalist or a politician or a human rights defender, that will even be seen as an aggravated circumstance. So it will attract an even higher penalty. So by all means, we want them to be held accountable. And then how NGO can support the Commission? The question was, what can we expect for the future 5 years? The college is not there yet, so I cannot. It will be wasted time for me to guess. I invite you to look at the mission letters, which they give. I cannot, and I don't have precise indication, but I can tell you that an open consultation will be launched in March this year, so that all stakeholders, NGOs, etc., can make their views known with regard what the new strategy and what the new commission should be pay attention to. This open consultation will remain open until May, and the results of this consultation will be published in the autumn 2025.
Okay. That's it?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
I think, thank you so much, Katarina.
Just a few, perhaps, short comments to the point about involving men and male allies. Couldn't agree more. One of the organizations we're working with on the white paper on protecting the public in the EU is called Men Able. I don't know if you've come across them, but it's an organization that specifically tries to bring men into the gender equality debate to ensure that it's not, as so often, one-dimensional. So that's one thing we're trying to do to change a bit that conversation, because, as you say, unfortunately, men aren't sufficiently involved, and there are, of course, very many men, I think, who agree that something needs to be done. Interesting comment on Maria Reza, and maybe if you want to hear more from about that activist in the context of technology as a tool and a weapon, the president of Microsoft, Brad Smith, has a podcast called Tools and Weapons, and one of the most recent guests he had on that podcast was Maria Reza. So you can look that up if you're interested. And I hope and think, I feel like in the last few months, to the point about how do you actually go after those who commit these crimes online, there's, of course, the directive that makes it criminal, but I've also, and I think I saw in the UK, it was just a couple of weeks ago, and I'm happy to share the examples, somebody got, and I think it was somebody who had repeat offender of online gender-based violence, hate speech, etc., got much more than 1 year. I think it was like 10 years of prison or something like that. And so I feel like, and of course the data privacy side is an issue, and that's, has, I think, delayed things like the directive on child sexual abuse material, etc. So there is that dimension that complicates the discussion, but criminalizing this activity and going after the perpetrators, which we can do, is, I feel, is a bit the way the wind is blowing, which is a good thing.
Yes, thank you so much. Maria, comment?
So many good questions.
Yes. So little time.
So little time. I think focusing on from a technology perspective, I mentioned that gender-based violence is a societal construct, a social construct rather, and so is technology. AI, for example, basically the tools that underpin and drive all of the technologies we use in our hands every day around governments, every corner of our lives. AI is built on discrimination. And so while to my point earlier about really needing to sort of make a societal shift in the way we understand equality and justice, online and offline, it's going to take time. But we also, in shifting the way, focusing on early childhood development and education is one great way to do that. But on the technology side, this is a whole different beast. It's a mirror that reflects our social constructs. And we need to think creatively, and we need to think critically and constantly about how these social constructs are manifesting in the technologies we build and use every day. That's not one point. Content removal is not enough. Nope, it's not enough. It's one, I think, when we look at technology, and specifically when we look at online spaces which are predominantly owned, operated, built by also predominantly men, one of the biggest tools, I think, as democracies is to ensure that we are building architectures that prioritize transparency and accountability, and that's for like every actor in the whole value chain, and that I think that's going to take a lot of time. We have, I think, the EU, we have some of the best tools in the world to actually make that happen. And I have a lot of hope myself on that front. How to hold aggressors accountable. I mentioned earlier, like how game companies are thinking creatively, not just blocking accounts, but also freezing and locking hardware. This is something that we can think across industries, across different sectors. There's a lot we can do, and every effort I think counts to flip that script. So I mentioned mandatory trainings, something that's coming out of the directive on violence against women. I think companies can do something similar. If obviously we have the technology to recognize repeat offenses or offenses and repeat offenses, let's do something about that. Not just freezing an account, actually making it mandatory to follow a training on gender equality or on safe content or on safe behavior online. That's a lot of that. There are many things that companies can do, also in collaboration with civil society or with governments, to actually build in due diligence that flips the script. And so I'm looking forward to helping support that movement on the technology side going forward. A ray of light. In a lot of the work that I'm doing, looking at current and future generations and how technology affects the role of technology in changing democracy and vice versa, I think it's really important to set a vision for what we actually want to achieve. What kind of world do we want to live in online and offline? And I find, especially for those of you who are working in technology policy, the debates tend to be so technical and so in the weeds, and it's so easy to get stuck in the details, which are very important, but we often lose sight of where we want to go. We're not really, there's no conversation right now about what kind of democracy we want to see online and offline. We're just stuck without that kind of vision. And I wonder, I mentioned worst case, best case scenario as a victim. I challenge this group of people and everyone you know to think about what kind of gender parity and what kind of world for women do we want to actually foster for the next generation, for ourselves, and keep that in sight. That's my ray of sunshine.
Thanks for the optimistic end note, because we are about to... Okay, just one more question quickly, and then we are done. But the lady here in the white... okay.
Hello, my name is Miriam, and I couldn't help but ask that question. I'm sorry.
No.
Whatever you said was very touching, because I myself was victim of gender-based violence, and I'm still on the fight penally wise. It's been more than 5 years. I had a handicap because of that, and penally wise, it's still taken a huge, long time. But it helped me switch from a medical student to studying medical sociology and see how socioeconomic factors intertwined in your body. I'm now also working with Médecins du Monde and with the EU in a project called Utopia. So it's about academic inclusion pedagogy. And I was wondering, actually, how much, especially Maria, how much do we integrate further trauma-informed care models in the health system for those victims? Because the problem of violence is not the act itself, but it's what happens later, macro-wise and micro-wise. And I would like to know, so that the people receive a multidisciplinary support for both men and women, prevention and care. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam.
Yes, I have the directive here with me because there are the articles. Certain articles are so rich of details and requirements that I want to be precise when I speak about them. With regard to trauma care, I invite you to look at the requirements in the articles that concern specialist support to victims. All the articles concerning support in this directive are to be seen as specialist support, so to be distinguished from the general support for victims of crimes in the Victim Rights Directive. The word trauma sensitive trauma counseling appears in several provisions of this article, starting from Article 25, which is about specialist support to victims and all the basic requirements of that support, going even farther zooming in, distinguishing specialist support for victims of sexual violence in the first place, in those rape crisis centers, sexual violence referral centers. They have to find trauma support that is gender sensitive, of course, and that takes into account the trauma that the victim comes with when the victim enters this center, and all the other support that this type of victims generally needs, like immediate medical and forensic examination, preservation of evidence, because, I mean, I'm going to be explicit now. A victim of rape, for example, it's essential that evidence of the rape is taken before the victim takes a shower, because after a shower, no evidence can be preserved. And specialist support for victims of female genital mutilation, again, speak about the trauma, takes into account the trauma in which that the victim experiences. So I don't want to be boring with all the details, but by all means, that is an aspect that was central in the thinking in our heads when we drafted the directive.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. And now we need to do all the trainings and education and awareness, so to make it alive, of course. Which was mentioned so many times regarding different issues. We are a little bit behind the schedule, so I want to conclude. But before giving the floor to European Movement Secretary General Petros Fasoulas, who will provide the concluding remarks, I just want to thank the amazing panel. Obviously, it has been very little time to discuss all the issues, all the very grand issues related to the fight against violence against women, and we will need to continue. And I'm sure Petros will mention our policy paper also that deals with gender equality, greater inclusion, and the presentation, which was one of the incentives for us to organize this debate and also continue discussing this issue in the future in cooperation with so many important partners from the civil society, institutions, and business sector. Thank you so much. It was really enjoyable for me to listen to you and learn from you a lot, and maybe a round of applause for you before Petros takes.
Thank you.
Indeed, a big thank you from all of us here at the European Movement, first and foremost at Microsoft for hosting us today and working with us on this very important issue, but also to all our speakers and all of you for joining us. I have to admit that every time I take part in an event like this, I leave both dismayed that our society is still struggling with these really painful issues, but at the same time, I leave full of hope because I see the work and the energy that so many activists and so many organizations put in combating gender-based violence. On our side, the European Movement, we have been running this initiative, the Women of Europe Awards, since I started here. And every year, we always have this discussion because we want to make sure this initiative is a space for women to take the spotlight and talk about the challenges that they face, but also the contribution they make to society. But at the same time, we want to make sure that men are there with you. Because like it has already been said, this fight isn't just yours, it's ours. It's a fight that all our society needs to fight together. Because if we're going to have a just and safe environment for our children to grow up, we need to all stand together in a united front and take on the enemies of equality and justice that we all want to compete with. So please carry on working with us. Our advocacy, our communications, our campaigns are centered in promoting European values. And of course, gender equality is at the core of that. We look forward to collaborating with you. And of course, if you can join us, do so on the 5th of December for the awards gala here in Brussels. Thanks again to Microsoft for hosting, all our speakers, and you for joining. Thanks again.
Thank you.